Afternoon, the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, Dr. Adam Marshall, who's speaking to us from, I presume, London, but I may be wrong, certainly the UK. We're having a number of these events as the British Chamber of Commerce in Romania, and it's been my pleasure as chairman of the Chamber to moderate these. Last week we had the Minister of Public Finance in Romania speaking to us, which is very well regarded by our members. There's a very informative discussion with the Minister. We hope to continue that. But we are a bilateral chamber, and we also look to have discussions with government at national and devolved level in the UK, where this is of interest to our members in the British Chamber. One of the particular things about the British Chamber, which sets us apart, I think, from our friends in the AmCham and the German Chamber and the French Chamber and the other chambers with whom we have good relations here, is that we are members of the British Chambers of Commerce network. For those of you who don't know, there are regional chambers of commerce in the UK, and there are the national level associations. The British Chambers is one, and also the Scottish Chambers up in Scotland. And around the world, there are British Chambers of Commerce like ours, bilateral, linking trade and members and companies and businesses between the UK and the wider world. So we have previously been accredited by the British Chambers of Commerce when we were receiving a grant from what was UKTI, and later became DIT, to promote trade promotion. Now that is now finished, that's back within the embassy. But we've kept our good relationship with the British Chambers of Commerce. And what I see as chairman, as our USP for the membership of the chamber, is the access that this gives our members in Romania, not only to all of the chambers of commerce in the UK, but also to all of the British Chambers of Commerce around the world through the global network. And we are looking to arrange very soon some bilateral events with other British Chambers of Commerce, both in the UK and with British Chambers of Commerce in this region. I'm very pleased to see we have people attending not only from around Romania, but also I think I can see Manchester, I can see Edinburgh, and I can see Bournemouth. So you also have a UK audience. So Adam Marshall, for those of you who don't know him, is the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. I think it's fair to say that his background is in policy. His previous jobs have been working for the Institute of Public Policy Research, the head of policy and business development at the Centre for Cities, and since July 2009, he's been with the BCC as executive director on policy and external affairs, and then latterly proceeding through to his position now as Director General. We will organize today with letting Adam tell us what he thinks is going to happen with Brexit. For those of you who've forgotten, it is happening, what has happened, in fact, and we're now in the transitional period. And what is happening there is that there are negotiations going on, which are supposed to lead to a more permanent agreement between the UK and the EU for trade after the end of the transitional period, which ends at the end of this year. I know that there are particular issues that concern our friends in Europe, such as fisheries, and of course, financial is a matter of particular interest to the UK. So, Adam, welcome. We look forward to hearing what you have to say to us.
Thanks, Neil, and good afternoon to you all, colleagues. We're a relatively small group today, so I'll keep my opening comments relatively short so we can have more time for discussion and conversation, because I always feel that that's always a better use of our time together. But as Neil says, we're very pleased at the British Chambers of Commerce to have the British Romanian Chamber of Commerce as part of our global business network. That network now has 60 British chambers in market all across the world. When I started doing this role 5 years ago, I think we had 10 or 11. So we've been building our network of British business communities around the world because we realize that chambers of commerce can do something that no one else can, which is help businesses connect and trade across borders, whatever the political weather and whatever the political situation may be. And I think the fact of the British chambers across Europe coming into our network over the past couple of years has been particularly important because it gives us a bit of an antidote to Brexit in a sense, because we can support businesses trying to work in both directions as much as possible over the years to come. We want businesses in Bucharest to be trading with businesses in Birmingham and Belfast and any other B that you can think of, so that we can continue the alliteration. But we also want to make sure that those trade flows are working in both directions, and that we as an organization are able to solve problems, bust barriers, and help wherever possible. So that's sort of just the starting point from where we are. And as Neil says, our global network, we now have 53 chambers in the UK, 60 British chambers in market around the world, and tens of thousands of businesses connected via that route with millions of employees. And it's a potentially powerful network for us to be able to navigate the period ahead. On Brexit, you probably will have seen or heard some of what we have tried to do as a British Chambers network over the last 4 years since the referendum. We've always tried to be practical and pragmatic rather than ideological in our approach. We didn't take a side during the referendum itself because we had divisions in business communities within the United Kingdom and in British business communities all around the world too. And instead we chose to focus our attention on the practicalities of, can you move stuff, can you move people, can you move information where it needs to go in order to trade effectively and appropriately, and do businesses have all the information and practical answers that they need in order to be able to continue that trade, even if it's with more friction and even if it is more expensive. So that's always the way that we tried to approach this. We had a significant influence on negotiating standpoints under both the previous government and the current one as well, in trying to look at some of those practicalities and some of those issues. And we also pushed the UK government particularly hard to define what would happen in the event of a no-deal scenario between the two sides. Obviously not something that we want to happen now or wanted to happen then, but we thought it was important for there to be absolute clarity on how businesses and their transactions would be treated if that were to come to pass. I think it's fair to say that the EU did a better job over those 4 years of defining what conditions would be under a no-deal scenario. I think procedures and processes were better defined. Customs authorities, particularly in the Netherlands, Belgium, and France, as the closest to us and with the most ferry and port traffic, did a particularly good job of getting organized. The UK is late in organizing itself, but has taken some steps in recent weeks and months in order to improve. And I think that we will start to see more clarity coming out of the UK's approach over the coming weeks. And I'll come back to that if I can in just a minute. We've been urging literally since the change of government for the UK to set out its stall and to be very clear with businesses on what they were going to need to do in order to change. But they could have started what they're doing right now about 18 months ago, quite frankly. We went up the potential no deal hill, as it were, and came back down again rather than going off the cliff on several occasions. And many businesses, as a result of that, actually put off doing anything because they said, I'd rather wait until I know definitively what the situation is going to be, rather than throw money at something which may change because the politics change on a sixpence. So a lot of businesses still underprepared, I think, for what will happen at the end of the year. Then, of course, into all of this came our beloved friend, COVID-19, which I think has really made things even more difficult for those of us who have tried to get practical answers on Brexit over the last 4 years. The reason has been because the UK civil service machine, which was geared up to focus on the Brexit challenge as the biggest exercise in peacetime sort of national change and transition, was then moved very quickly to focusing on the pandemic. Businesses also refocused their attention around the pandemic. And as a result, even though we're only less than 6 months out from the date of the end of the transition period, people's eyes are not on the ball as much as one would want them to be, because they've been focused on dealing with the immediate impact of the pandemic on cash, on jobs, trying to figure out whether customer demand is going to increase in return, trying to secure supply chains across borders that have been disrupted by public health measures taken in different countries, et cetera, et cetera. So we face a fairly monumental challenge, as it were. But we haven't left this to one side at the BCC, and in fact, we're going to continue to and increase our volume on it over the weeks to come. As I said previously, businesses need clarity in 3 areas. They need to know how they can move goods across borders. That's area number 1. Area number 2 is that they need to know how they can move people across borders, because of course a lot of what we trade these days is in services rather than in physical goods. And I think a lot of the emphasis has been, perhaps understandably, because it's very visible, on physical goods to date. And the third, of course, really importantly, how do businesses move data and information across borders? So crucial to many of those services firms, and in particular in light of what I would say is an extremely inflexible EU approach on data adequacy. But we've seen that not just in terms of its dealings and negotiations with the UK, but with many other markets around the world. And we've seen it with the invalidation of the safe harbor arrangements with the US, literally just in the past week as well. So moving people, moving goods, and moving data. On goods, our emphasis has been on understanding customs and non-tariff barrier issues that will affect firms and how businesses can prepare and get as much clarity as possible in order to be able to trade effectively. The UK has finally published this past week what it calls its border operating model, which will give businesses much greater clarity on what they will need to do. And the UK government also did something sensible, which was to put in place a series of easements for the first 6 months, basically saying firms could take their time in filing their customs declarations. They had 6 months in order to fill in their customs declarations. And that they would have a pretty soft regime at the border for goods coming in from the EU during that period. One thing that would be very helpful for the British Romanian Chamber and for other British chambers based on the continent to do is to argue with EU national customs authorities to apply similar easements during that period. So far, there's been no sign of that happening, which of course is all part of the negotiations, but would be, I think, of benefit to businesses on both sides, particularly those smaller firms that need more time to get ready for change. Some big firms are saying they'll go to a full fat WTO customs model overnight. Why can they do that? They can do it because they do it in other markets and it's simply replicating what they already do. But for those who don't have experience of doing this and of trading outside the EU structures, it's going to take more time. So customs easements on both sides would probably be extraordinarily handy. Other things on goods still to be resolved, things on industrial standards, for example, and what markings goods need to have in order to be sold. You know, why wouldn't the UK accept CE marking in future as being reasonable for goods coming in as complying with safety standards? And again, I think the UK is probably being a little more flexible than the EU side on what it is willing to accept. But we need to see things like sort of testing regimes and various other things sorted out so that companies can hopefully do things once rather than 2 or 3 times and have to carry the additional frictional costs associated with that. So there's quite a lot in the area of goods, and that's even before you get on to the negotiation of things like tariffs, which clearly the 2 sides are engaged on now. For most of our businesses, by the way, they would say to you that tariffs are not their principal concern, with the exception of a few very sensitive sectors, because most tariffs are de minimis or relatively low anyway. It's not tariffs, it's actually the behind the border procedures and it's the friction procedures that really worry them most of all. So you know, a lot of the emphasis in the media has been on tariffs, but unless you're exporting meat, for example, or cheese, or a very, very sensitive and often protected product, it's less of an issue than some of the other issues. On people, the big for us are around mobility and making sure that, say, an engineer in Romania that needs to visit a client in the UK and carry out some work for that client can continue to do so flexibly without the need to apply for a specific work visa. Same thing in reverse. If a British company providing services to a Romanian client, you know, they need to be able to get out there. They need to be able to conduct the work within a short visit and be able to return home without being told they're working illegally or without being told that their licenses and qualifications don't apply. So trying to make sure that there's some sort of mutual recognition of qualifications beyond the Brexit deadline is hugely important in the people space. In terms of the UK's future immigration system, it will seem, if you're sat on the EU side right now, like a very draconian system. My honest view would be worry not. It's not. That's designed for domestic political consumption in the UK. The new points-based system, I actually think, is going to make it easier for many people to come into the country. The only difference is going to be that there will be cost associated with it, whereas previously there wasn't. So I think many of the people who come from markets like Romania to work in the United Kingdom with recognized employers with medium or high level skills will face absolutely no barriers in doing so in the future, but their employer and themselves may face a little bit of additional administrative and processing cost. But I do not see that system as a threat to future mobility when people do need to move across borders for work purposes. Then on data, I mentioned already, GDPR and the equivalence regimes and things like that. I'm worried that this is being used as a negotiating and bargaining chip because, of course, the UK side has already said no problem. The Information Commissioner's Office is very happy for data to move from the UK to the EU because it's confident of the standards being applied. It's in the opposite direction where we have the issue. So again, if the British Romanian Chamber and colleagues can urge the EU to get to a data adequacy agreement with the UK, it will help so many businesses who have very simple and very basic customer data that they need to move around. Everyone thinks that this is all about sort of whiz-bang Google type operations. It's not. There's quite a lot of very, very normal businesses that could be caught up in this and face significant fines. So we do want to see an agreement sorted on it. So those are the areas that we're following most closely and pushing for answers on. Just in terms of a sort of off-the-record political view on the negotiations, I think the two sides are engaged in a game of significant brinksmanship right now, in the knowledge that the EU was not going to focus on Brexit again until the multi-annual financial framework and the rescue package were sorted out. So they've done that now, 4 days and a marathon of talks later. I'm not sure anyone is particularly satisfied with it. But they'll now go on holiday for August, and then Brexit can resume in September. That's always the sort of feeling that we get, coming from here. That's uncomfortably close for all of us in business, of course, because having only a couple of months to prepare for massive change in that respect is difficult, which is why we're encouraging companies to do so sooner. But I do think there is a landing zone for a fairly narrow free trade agreement before the end of the year. And I think the two sides will move their positions in the autumn to try to get there. Many have said, and Neil and I have discussed previously, that it also feels like there's a bit of a blame game going on, that each is trying to maneuver to get the other to take the fall if things do go wrong between now and the end of the year. Undoubtedly, that's the case. And the UK, for domestic political consumption, is very happy for that to be the narrative. The Europeans couldn't coordinate 27 positions, and it's their fault that we never got there in the end. I think that's ungenerous. I think that if the negotiations were to fail, it would be a failure of statecraft on all sides, and it would be failing business communities on all sides, all of whom would like to see some sort of agreement that preserves at least some of the facilitations and advantages around trade that we've seen over so many years. But I suppose just finally, never forget the domestic political arena in the UK and what you read and see from the UK side, particularly those who are based here. When you're based here, you understand it. You understand that this is for domestic political consumption. Then, of course, something else different is being discussed by David Frost and his team in the negotiations. It's important not to read too much into the domestic political megaphone noise. Our contacts in government very much want there to be a deal between now and the end of the year. They do want to arrive at a pragmatic and reasonable point that allows business and trade as much as possible to continue. Yes, they are happy to end the negotiations without agreement. They are willing to take that risk. But I believe the reason why they are taking that risk is to up the stakes so that in the autumn we do have some sort of conclusion. The outcome from that may be very difficult for businesses to deal with, but I think that's what's going on right now. So ladies and gentlemen, all of us in the business community are part of a high stakes game of chicken at the moment. My hope is that it doesn't end in a car crash. With that, Neil, I think I'll stop, and I'm very happy to answer any questions, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Adam. Very interesting. Now, this afternoon we have some time, so we're going to let people who are on the call ask their questions live. So, do we have any questions? I'm sure we be asking. Who wants to ask the first question, or I will do so.
Always the most difficult one.
Okay, I can start.
Thank you, Joseph.
Okay. Thank you.
Who you are and what
Sorry.
you're doing. Who you are and what for
yes.
Adam, we all know you, but I'm sure Adam probably doesn't.
Yes, sure. I'm in charge of a British school in Bucharest called Cambridge School of Bucharest, and I'm located now in Bucharest. And thank you for this presentation, Adam. It's very clear, and we are very concerned. Regarding, I have two questions, in fact. The first one is, do you know more about British people who are willing to come and work in Romania? Because you spoke about the opposite way around, Romanian going to the UK. Do you have any idea about the formalities? You said it should be very feasible, but at a certain cost. This is the first question. And the second one, what about being a school? We are interested for our students to know what will be the policy of the universities in the UK regarding European and particularly Romanian students coming there, in terms of fees and other things. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Joseph. In terms of British people being able to work in Romania, of course, immigration being a reserved matter for the various EU governments, I think pressuring the Romanian government for clarity on how it will operate, work permits for Britons in future, for example, and residence arrangements for Britons in future, I think is particularly important. I'm sure Neil and the team probably know a heck of a lot more about what's going on domestically than I do on that front. I don't sense a reduced willingness of people in the UK to work in other European countries if the right opportunity comes up. I've always felt like they were willing to do that. But that there will be concern about administrative barriers. And I actually think, and this is a personal view, but I think the European country that puts the lowest barriers to Britons coming to work is going to get a lot of attention from British job seekers looking to go abroad. The European country that puts the highest barriers in place to Britons coming over to work and live and contribute to the tax system will be castigated for that as well. So there'll be a bit of arbitrage there, and markets like Romania possibly have an opportunity to attract British talent, particularly if we do see 4 million unemployed off the back of the coronavirus crisis, which is a very real prospect. And many of those will be skilled individuals who might be welcomed into the professional sectors in Romania. Now, they might not be welcomed necessarily by high-skilled Romanian professionals suffering from similar levels of unemployment due to the crisis, but I do think that would be a possibility. On schools and on UK universities, UK universities are facing a perfect storm right now. So the coronavirus crisis is disastrous for UK universities because of their dependence on foreign students and foreign student income. Many of the students can't get there, or they're not willing to pay the same fees that they were paying for in-person courses for some of the online offerings that are being put forward. So the university sector is hurting a lot. The ongoing disputes between the UK and China at the moment, particularly hurting that sector because Chinese students represent such a significant fraction of that population. But with European students, the government's made it clear that European students will, beyond those who are on courses already, will not be treated as home students in future for the purposes of fees. Everyone in the world will be treated the same way. So that probably reduces the attractiveness of UK universities for many European students. But in a world where they're not likely to go to the US or Australia post-coronavirus because it's too far and they worry they get stranded, for those who are able to pay those fees, the UK may still be a very attractive destination. Plus, they're still lower than the US and Australian fees by some description anyway. So I think there will be a reduction in numbers for a period of time, but I think the whole university business model is up for grabs, and we don't know where it's going to land yet.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question, Joseph.
Thank you.
Who else would like to ask a question? Perhaps I can ask one in the meantime while others think what they would like to ask. We had, during the recent Romanian presidency of the European Union, we had a very successful chamber event here with visiting representatives of the Information Commissioner's Office, who I think were largely coming across to talk about the safe harbour arrangements with Romania as the then president of the EU, but also took time to talk to the chamber. It was a very well-attended meeting indeed. Data and the knowledge sector, I think, is very important in Romania. We have a lot of tech companies working from here, exporting to the UK and to other places. To what extent are we able to, well, we can obviously speak to those companies and they can talk to the Romanian government. Is that an area where it's a bilateral event between the UK and Romania, or is it more a matter that Romania must put pressure upon the other members of the EU to agree something on data transfer?
Yeah, it's Romania has to put pressure on the European institutions to get to an agreement, because it's not a bilateral. It's not a bilateral thing. It would be an EU-UK thing there, and it's up to the European Commission to make a decision on data adequacy. Now, I think it's ridiculous that they seem unwilling to do so right now. It's obviously part of the political negotiation, because, of course, the UK operates the exact same rules that the rest of the EU does at this particular moment in time. There is no divergence. So whilst you won't find me agreeing with UK politicians on a lot of positions, I think that one is reasonable. It's being held as a negotiating card in this very high stakes poker game that we're doing right now. I would hope that data adequacy would be forthcoming fairly quickly, because, you know, the UK then holds a card as well, which is that would affect things like euro-denominated clearing, which is handled through the City of London, banks in the City of London, and without which the EU financial system would face some serious stress for a period of time. So there are swings and roundabouts in this. It goes in both directions, and both sides are holding on to these particular advantages and cards until very late in the day. But of course, that makes businesses very nervous, and they're all looking for workarounds on things like data. You know, what they can put, what standard contractual clauses they can put in, for example, that allow them to move data around successfully, and what other arrangements they need to put in place. So I think we'll see businesses doing as much as they can to get workarounds in place. But it would be a big sigh of relief if we just had a data adequacy decision, and both the ICO and the Commission could be very happy that data flows between the two parties will be protected adequately, because both operate very similar privacy regimes.
Yeah, that would seem sensible to me. Is it fair to say that politically the EU can't allow Brexit to be seen as a success for the UK? Because more might want to follow.
I'm sure that does enter into the political calculus in the European institutions. But they only have control up to a certain point. They have control in terms of the negotiating process and their side of the negotiating table. Once the end of the transition period has occurred, whether there is an arrangement or there is not an arrangement, both sides actually have gone their own ways, and the UK could make a success of its future arrangements if it made the right choices. So it's not entirely within the control of either side in these negotiations. Now, I look at a couple of things going on with COVID right now, and I think to myself, the world is very different from when these negotiations started. What does that mean? So one of the things we were most concerned about pre-COVID was incredibly integrated, just-in-time continental supply chains in things like car manufacturing and aerospace and a variety of other things. Well, the fact that internal borders closed across the continent for a period of time, and moving goods around and moving logistics around got more difficult, led a lot of people to realize that just-in-time might need to be replaced by just-in-case, which of course is more expensive, but you're going to have to hold a bit more stock in future. actually, if you're a UK industry that's competing in a very quick, just-in-time environment, your business model is very different than if you're competing in a just-in-case environment where you actually might be able to move the stuff around, deal with the border friction, and then still be okay. So things are changing because of COVID. You may also see a bit more reshoring, where people try to do stuff closer to home, or at least diversify their supply chains a bit more, so they're not as dependent on single suppliers as they used to be too. So some of the general assumptions going into this, i.e. the UK is going to lose because it loses out in terms of just-in-time supply chains, that may be a little different now. I don't know yet, but it may be a little bit different to what it was before. And similarly with the provision of services, if you're sat as I am in London right now, and I've been talking to British chambers all across the world, I've been having meetings with partners and customers and things like that around the world, etc., providing services effectively, sat from where I am, governed under the laws of this country, rather than providing services in person to a customer on their premises. Actually, you can probably do a lot more, and the sort of single market matters a little bit less than it did in the days before COVID. None of these transitions are final yet. None of them are entirely clear, but I think times are changing a little bit, and the UK's ability to make some success out of new arrangements may increase over the next few years.
Yes, we've heard a lot about offshoring and nearshoring. Now we're hearing about reshoring. So I'm wondering to what extent you see the way the world is changing to respond to the COVID crisis, it actually fits in well with the BREXIT model.
I think those who predict that there will be mass reshoring are wrong. I think there will be a little bit of reshoring. I think there will be a lot of diversification of supply chains, though. So if previously, I'll take an example. If previously a UK company was getting all of its supplies for a certain product from Greece, and then had problems because Greece closed its borders, etc., that same company may now actually be looking to suppliers in Bulgaria and Romania and the Slovak Republic as well, and have a relationship with suppliers in each to make sure it can always get access to what it needs. I think those kinds of arrangements will become more common. But moving it all lock, stock and barrel back to the UK, not likely. Maybe some sensitive things, but not likely. Because the UK is still a high-cost place to do business. And many businesses will get to the calculation that a lower-cost place to do business plus some friction and transit costs is still cheaper for me than doing it in the UK. I might still do that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. If other people have questions in the meantime, please raise your hand or jump in.
Yeah.
Joseph, carry on.
No, again, okay. Okay, I will. It will be very fast. Adam, the Brexit, let's say, has been started to be implemented, or it became valid on the 1st of February. Yes, it was just before the COVID.
Yeah.
So 6 months ago. Is there any assessment, any first assessment of the results of the impact on different sides, let's say economically, socially, etc.?
Of Brexit, you mean?
Yes, first assessment. Or will there be certain indexes or certain measurements that will be done regularly to see the impact?
No impact yet is the answer, because all business conditions remain more or less identical through the transition period. If there has been any impact, it's not on existing business, it's on future business. It's on companies holding off on investment decisions that they might otherwise have made for the UK, for example, whilst they wait to see how things turn out. But there's been no impact on most existing businesses. People have just continued trading as much as they can whilst making preparations for change in the future. So I think ask the same question on January 31st of next year, which will be 1 month after the end of the transition period, and we'll start to see more of that more clearly. So Nicu.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Nicu Severin Sânzianu. I manage a consulting company. We do recruitment and support services for HR and accounting. We have British customers, which we help them bring their business, a part of their business here, after the model you told earlier. Britain is a lot more expensive than to do business, to have 40 IT developers in London than in Iași, for example.
Yeah.
So what opportunities do you see now? That's why I'm here. Because you told us about the free constraints, about the moving the goods, moving the services, and moving the data. We are in the moving the services part.
Yeah.
Always when we have a door shut down to open. What doors do you see opening now?
Well, in services, I think there will be great opportunities, not just in the UK, but globally, for those countries like Romania that have a highly educated and specialized population and that have invested heavily in world languages like English. But I think the competition will be very fierce. So take service provision, into the UK or another large Anglophone country. That could be provided from Romania, but it could also be provided from the Philippines or from India or from any other market around the world. It almost doesn't matter where the professionals are located these days. So I think there'll be a lot of competition for those offshore services jobs. So I suppose the opportunity is for those companies and for those countries that make their offer particularly unique. And, take Romania as an example, I would say, okay, Romanian people tend to be very multilingual. They have, often have several Latin languages as well as English, at their disposal, so they can help you with some of the rest of your European work. You're still only a few hours from London, so if you need to get out to visit your operation, you can do that very easily. If the government has put in place facilitations, as we were saying earlier, for people to do that successfully and efficiently, that would be a plus. And if the cost base is considered reasonable, but the quality level is considered high, then that will always win out. So I think there will be more globalization of mid-level services jobs in future, particularly now that we know that you can work remotely successfully. Our experiment of the past 4 or 5 months is that everyone can do everything remotely without having to be there in person. And I think that will accentuate the level of services jobs being moved around and a little bit of the commercial arbitrage around that. So I think that is a major opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I ask, you mentioned the issue about what's easier, what's under discussion. We also had visits from the Treasury when Romania was the chairing the European Union or the European Council. And one of the points that I've noticed in 20 odd years of practice here as a commercial lawyer is that a lot of the issues that relate to investment are not really ones that relate to the European Union. So in particular, the double taxation treaty, I think it's fair to say that there's a perception that many British businesses here are actually invested through the Netherlands, because the Netherlands is seen as having a better double taxation treaty than the UK has. And in particularly in my case, the bilateral investment protection treaty. And here we have quite a high profile case of 2 Romanian gentlemen who moved to Sweden some years ago and came back and invested under the Swedish bilateral investment protection treaty, and then had a problem when Romania joined the EU, and their state aid was seen as being incompatible with the single market. I know there was pressure in the European Union to revoke the bilateral trade protection treaties. How do you see that being dealt with, apart from the discussions about Brexit and free trade? Because I would see those as particularly important levels to be addressed, given the UK's centre of investment in other countries such as Romania.
Yeah. I know that there is an effort going on to update double taxation treaties and investor protection arrangements and things like that with a number of markets. I question whether the UK has the bandwidth to do as many of those agreements as quickly as is needed in order to make that as effective and as sound as possible. Neil, you'll know a lot more than I will, given your field of expertise, but a lot of these date from the 50s and 60s or 70s. They haven't been particularly updated. I would assume the one for Romania probably comes from the 90s, given it would probably have been post transition, but I might be wrong.
I
Huh?
think it's 1970s for investment.
Oh, so I was wrong. So, so it's not even as new as that. But I think all of these need updating. Another one, will be around aviation, for example, and some or transport services, where those competences less rest with a country rather than with the European authorities. So there's a lot of bilateral work that needs to be done, and I think that the British Romanian Chamber and all of the other bilateral chambers can actually exercise some very, very serious pressure to make sure that that work happens. And I think it's going to be important, because if there's ever the sense, back to Nico's question, that one market may fall behind another in terms of its ability to gain business or gain opportunities, then making sure that those sorts of arrangements are up to date is going to be particularly important.
Thank you. I'd say it would be good to know from the DCC the areas in which you believe that the local chambers like ourselves can have a useful lobbying task to talk to our host governments. Yeah. I'm not aware that there's that information in a single place.
Yeah. Okay.
But similarly, I think
write myself a note.
Super. Thank you. The customs easements are a very important thing, I think. What about cabotage? Because at the moment we've had a lot of Romanian drivers moving goods around the European Union, including the UK. Do you see a change coming in road transport and cabotage?
I do, but I may be wrong on this, but I don't see the problem coming from the UK side on this, but rather from the EU side. The UK has recognized that it has a dependency on European lorry drivers to move stuff around, and I think has been pretty permissive in terms of the set of arrangements that it's put in place for the future. I think the EU is still playing hardball and saying if there's no deal, then the number of licenses available will be very small compared to the number of UK hauliers that need to move stuff around. And they're also saying that cabotage won't be possible, but you'll just have to transport stuff from the UK to its final destination. Interestingly, I think logistics ultimately is an industry that knows how to adapt and will adapt to whatever the final arrangements are, and will do so fairly successfully. I don't have a huge fear of that. So, for example, mixed consignments was one thing that people were worried about, and the number of different customs declarations that would be required for a mixed consignment. Well, logistics companies are already sorting that out by trying to move more to scale with consignments that are less mixed, or there are fewer different things going in the back of a lorry, just to make sure that they don't face too many of those sorts of problems. I think they'll do the same in a range of other areas. But I don't know how the cabotage point will ultimately play out. The UK being in the geographical position that it is, for a Romanian haulier will still have permission, for example, to move some stuff to Germany, and then from Germany to France, and then from France into the UK. They're not going to have a problem doing that. I think the only question is if they were moving it then onward to the Republic of Ireland from the UK over the land bridge, that there is a question there, which is, to my mind, still unresolved.
Thank you. Any other questions from our audience, please? Or I can carry on asking my question, which is fine for me, but it can be boring for Adam. Good. We've mentioned data. One of the particular areas of Romania that has a lot of input into the UK is the garment trade. Mm-hmm. And again, this goes back into the question of transport of finished garments and raw materials to and from the UK and Romania. Do you see that being an area where there are likely to be particular issues, where we had LOHN agreements with fabric being provided to factories here to be processed and then returned as finished garments to the UK?
Yeah,
I mean, how that would play out in tariffs, or if it's a case of because there's no change of ownership.
Yeah, I don't think people will be moving stuff backwards and forwards to the same extent that they had done previously. I think they'll try to get it to the place where it's going to be processed into a finished good and then exporting it once, because that's only one cross-border transaction rather than multiple cross-border transactions. So I think there'll be some of that rearrangement. I think the big question for things like the garment industry is what tariffs ultimately will be applied. Because it is a low margin industry and tariffs are sometimes one of the most sensitive points. And particularly with competition coming from markets like Vietnam and Indonesia and others, Romania could find itself in a similar place to Portugal a number of years ago, which was one of the centers of the garment industry, or Spain as well was another center of the garment industry, which are no longer. So I think there'll be a sort of rather long-term process of change there. However, that said, given the recent problems that we've seen in the garment industry around slave labor, around inappropriate working practices and things like that in the UK, where there were a number of factories were found to be operating illegally, and similarly with arrangements in Bangladesh and a number of other markets around the world, those who've got a good system set up might be in a good position in future.
Thank you. One of the other things, which again I noticed from practice, even when we had a single market in financial services, it was very, very difficult for investors from Romania or from Bulgaria to open bank accounts for companies in the UK or for themselves in the UK. And okay, well, there's obviously a need to keep an eye on money laundering, particularly with regard to the recent report of the Intelligence and Security Committee as to where the money is coming from. But now that we have let's say, you can do many things online, but we seem to find that an insistence by the UK banks upon having a resident person, be it a shareholder or a resident director, as a condition for opening an account for a UK business, a particular impediment. Do you see any way of addressing that issue in the post-Brexit world?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer. I mean, I know we've talked to some of the financial services industry UK side about the resident director provisions and everything else. Ultimately, it comes down to how strict the UK's financial regulation is going to be once it's outside of the Brussels orbit. And it's a question, I think, for the FCA and for others as to how they're going to operate the regime. I see nothing that suggests that the UK is going to be any less tough in terms of the level of checks that it puts in place for AML, anti-money laundering rules and things like that, or indeed on accounts, because the UK doesn't want to end up on a tax haven or a fiscal blacklist of any description. And I think so I would expect the standards to remain extremely high, and some of those barriers probably will remain. But I know that colleagues in the banks are aware of the problem on resident directors. I do know that.
Yes, that seems, well, particularly with people find it harder to travel in the current circumstances. That would be a particular easing, I think, would help investment going back into the UK from this part of the world.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. We'll take that up in some of our conversations.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from our audience at the moment? We still have some more time to ask questions.
Stun them all into boredom or silence. I'm not sure which one it is.
Well, perhaps I can ask one again about the BCC and the global network. We're keen to do more with other chambers in the network. And we're in the process of going through the benchmarking exercise to see how this chamber operates compared to our peers in other countries around the world. Do you see any particular other things that the BCC can offer to members of this chamber to help grow their businesses and help do business in the UK and in other countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the building of a chamber-to-chamber network is the most valuable prize that we've got, and that in turn will allow members to engage directly with each other. You know, I'd love to see the British Romanian Chamber, for example, pick 2 or 3 chambers in the UK. There may be ones that have a high population of Romanian diaspora in the UK or Romanian business people in the UK, might be those areas. That's what I see with a lot of bilateral chambers happening. But they build those relationships, the members start to interact with each other, and all of a sudden you see business deals flowing in both directions. So the ability to get to know peers on both sides and then to gain their confidence and know that you're working through a trusted third party is, I think, really, really important. The other thing that my colleagues are looking at doing, so Anne-Marie Martin, who is herself Romanian and probably a very good friend to the Chamber as an ex director of the Chamber herself, you know, she's leading a lot of this work for us at the BCC globally, and I know has a special desire to make sure that it works.
Good. This could be your last chance to ask other questions in the next 3 or 4 minutes. Come on, I know I can see lots of you there who I know are not shy when I meet you.
Can I ask,
Raymond, good for you.
Yeah, can I ask a question to Ed? And thank you very much for your presentation. I'm with DJR and from Bournemouth. See the huge opportunity with Romania. Do you not think we should be more proactive from our private sector side? And I'm thinking particularly in our healthcare sector, and care sector is particularly private sector led and dominated, that we could really kind of be more proactive from our side in actively seeking you know, that kind of trade we can do with Romania, and also its geopolitical positioning, being on the Black Sea, kind of looking east as well. I think there's huge advantages if we were much more proactive on the private sector side, not really waiting for what's happening on the kind of governmental side, or relying too much on the DIT, or how the negotiations go. I think from what I've heard from the Romanian government officials through the Chamber's webinars, Romania's absolutely keen and open to working with Britain. And I would say with our private sector, and I think we're in a unique situation with our chambers, and DGR is a member of the Essex Chamber, and as you know, a real powerful chamber. And I think we could really take that leadership role. So I'd love to hear your view on that, Adam. Thank you.
I'll be very, very blunt if I can, which is I think a big chunk of the British private sector probably needs a big kick up the posterior in order to seek out those opportunities. They have let government lead in a lot of respects. They have gone where they've been led. And I think that the changes that we're about to go through will lead many to realize whether they can continue in international trade, because they're actually making the effort themselves to get out there and do it themselves and do it for themselves. Vis-a-vis Romania as a market, you know, I agree, geostrategic position is very, very interesting at the moment in the EU, but, you know, on the borders of the CIS states on the one hand, you've got you know, Turkey and the Near East also close by as well. You know, it is a great geostrategic position. I think those British businesses who are in Romania could do a job of selling to businesses back in the UK why that is the case, and get more of them sort of understanding that and awake to it.
Thank you, Raymond. I think we're almost on time, so unless there are any other questions.
You've got one more from Richard, I think.
Richard.
Yes, just raising my hand there, Neil. Well, thank you for the presentation, Adam. It's very good to engage from the Romanian, also the British perspective. I came back to Manchester before the lockdown to run my business online, and we're gearing up already for 2021. Later this year, we had talked about starting a British Community Day, and to work with other chambers to host a British themed community event. As operations, the business of sports schools in Romania and Bulgaria, we'd already run 2 successful events in 2016 and 2018 with the British Bulgarian Business Association. I wondered, could you help provide any other examples of other chambers that are engaging with the British embassies to run community and sporting events across Europe or across the world? As we saw, it was a very good occasion to bring together international communities and really promote brand Britain.
It's interesting. I don't know that much about it, Richard, but I do know that in those markets where the local British Chamber has got a great relationship with the embassy or the consulate in market, or the High Commission in market, they tend to be willing to both host and really put some energy behind ideas like that. So I've seen it in Germany, for example, where the British Chamber in Germany has done some extensive work. with the embassy in Berlin, and with great results and very high impact in that way. I've seen it in a few other markets too. But I think it is something to be explored. I think the best way to do it is to make sure that every British chamber overseas has got that great relationship with the embassy, our High Commission, with the DIT branch in market as well. Because the minute you tell them that what you're doing will ultimately result in increased export in some way or some increased business connectivity, they tend to be all over it.
I'm pleased to see we do have representation from the British Embassy in Bucharest on this call. So that I hope shows our good relationship with our colleagues in the embassy.
Excellent.
Any last questions? Nope. Well, in that case, can I say, Adam, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation this afternoon. It's one of the really good things, I think, about this lockdown and our switch to online is we have a chance to have people like yourself talk to us from the UK. Who've done this before would have required you getting on a plane and coming to Bucharest, and others to come from Cluj-Napoca or Iași or Timișoara to come and hear you. This is a much more efficient way, and I think a much more open way of us to interact with you. So thank you very much for your time.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I wish you all well, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. For those of us who are still here, our next event will be face-to-face, having just sung the praises of online events. Our next event will be a socially distanced summer party. That you won't get a chance to meet Adam at it, but you might get the chance to meet me, those of you who don't already know me. Anna, would you like to say a little bit about it?
Yes, thank you, Neil. Thank you, Adam, as well for being here with us. I'm very pleased to say that this has been our last webinar in July. So it's been great that we had the chance to discuss on Brexit. And yes, we've inserted a gathering, a face-to-face event next week, starting with 7 p.m. at Marion Grand Hotel. All safety measures will be taken. So if you want to come, just join. I will also put the link here in case you want to join us. And yes, we're
might actually say face to mask to face.
Yes, we suggest you have masks with you. Of course, it's in the garden, so it's not going to be an indoor event, but yeah, we do suggest you have a mask with you.
We might give a prize for the best mask.
Yeah.
So, for those of you who are in Bucharest or can get to Bucharest, I hope that might be something you'd like to come on. So please get in touch with the Chamber. And Anna can give you the details of that. Can I say for this afternoon, thank you to Stefan and Madalina and Anna for setting this up. I think it's been very useful. It's good to see you all on the call. If you have any comments or questions upon how we're doing, who you'd like to hear on these webinars, as I've mentioned, we're now much better able to get people, significant people, to come and speak to us. We've had both ambassadors, we've had the Minister of Finance here, and we've now had Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. So if there are others you'd like us to get, please let us know. We'll see what we can do. In the meantime, I wish you all the very best of health and a very good afternoon. And we hope to see some of you next week. Thank you all very much indeed. Good afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you very much for another successful webinar, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.